In 2014, Elliot Rodger launched a deadly attack in Isla Vista, killing 6 and injuring 14 in a violent spree. His manifesto revealed deep anger, rejection, and mental health struggles, igniting debates on misogyny and online extremism. Today, we'll uncover the events behind this shocking tragedy. If you want more deep dives into true crime cases, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content. Elliot Rodger was born on July 24, 1991 in London, England, to Peter Rodger, a British filmmaker, and Lee Chin Rodger, a Malaysian-born research assistant. The family moved to the United States when Elliot was young, settling in Los Angeles. His father's career in the film industry gave Elliot an early exposure to a world of wealth and privilege. He attended red carpet events and had the opportunity to meet famous individuals. Yet despite this seemingly glamorous background, Elliot struggled with deep feelings of inadequacy and isolation from an early age. Elliot was described by those who knew him as shy and socially awkward. Growing up, he found it difficult to make friends and was often overshadowed by others. Despite his father's success and the privilege of his upbringing, Elliot felt a growing sense of disconnect from the world around him. He attended a series of private schools in Los Angeles where his social difficulties became more pronounced. Throughout his childhood, he was often bullied, which only deepened his sense of alienation. According to Elliot's own writings, he was humiliated and ostracized by peers, particularly because of his small stature and introverted nature. His feelings of rejection began to crystallize around his experiences with women, whom he believed were denying him the attention and affection he felt entitled to. In his teenage years, Elliot's struggles with social isolation worsened. He spent much of his time alone, retreating into video games and fantasy worlds, which offered an escape from his feelings of inadequacy. His inability to form meaningful relationships with others, especially women, became a central focus of his growing resentment. By his late teens, Elliot had developed an intense fixation on the idea that he was being unfairly excluded from the pleasures of life, especially in terms of romantic and sexual relationships. This belief would later feature heavily in his manifesto. Elliot's family was aware of his emotional struggles and sought professional help for him on multiple occasions. As a child, he was diagnosed with high-functioning autism, a condition that can affect social interaction and communication. He also exhibited signs of depression and anxiety, and he was prescribed medication at various points in his life, though he was often resistant to taking it. His mental health challenges were compounded by his increasing isolation, both socially and physically. He withdrew from social activities and became more reclusive, spending hours on the internet, where he began to engage with toxic online communities that reinforced his feelings of resentment and entitlement. Despite his family's efforts to help him, Elliot's social and emotional difficulties continued to escalate. He attended several different high schools in an attempt to find a place where he could fit in, but his experiences remained largely negative. He described himself as an outcast and frequently blamed others for his lack of social success. This perception of himself as a victim of an unjust society became a dominant theme in his thinking. After high school, Elliot moved to Isla Vista to attend Santa Barbara City College, though his academic performance was poor and he eventually dropped out. His experiences in college mirrored those of his earlier school years. Lonely, frustrated, and increasingly angry. Isla Vista, with its vibrant college social scene, only heightened his feelings of exclusion, as he watched others enjoying the social interactions and relationships he desperately craved but felt unable to attain. Elliot's growing bitterness, combined with his mental health struggles, led him to withdraw even further from reality. He spent much of his time online, where he became involved with forums that fueled his anger toward women and society. He fixated on the idea that women were deliberately withholding attention and affection from him, and he began to view his inability to attract a romantic partner as the ultimate injustice. This toxic mindset, coupled with his deteriorating mental health, set the stage for the tragic events that would unfold in Isla Vista. Despite these warning signs, Elliot's outward behavior remained relatively unremarkable to most who encountered him. While his family and a few close individuals were aware of his struggles, he largely kept his more extreme thoughts and plans hidden. His social isolation deepened, and by the time he reached his early 20s, his sense of anger and entitlement had evolved into a dangerous obsession. Elliot Rodger's manifesto, titled My Twisted World, spans 141 pages and provides a detailed, albeit disturbing, insight into his mindset leading up to the attacks in Isla Vista. This document, along with a series of YouTube videos he posted prior to the attack, offers a clear picture of his growing anger, isolation, and eventual radicalization. My Twisted World functions as both an autobiography and a justification for the violent actions he was about to take. In his writings, Rodger begins by detailing his early life experiences, focusing on his feelings of rejection and loneliness, which he claims began in childhood and continued throughout his adolescence and early adulthood. These experiences, according to Rodger, shaped his belief that the world was deeply unfair to him. He frequently describes a sense of entitlement to the pleasures and experiences he saw others, particularly his peers, enjoying, namely romantic and sexual relationships, social status, and happiness. He lamented that these experiences seemed to be denied to him, fueling a deep resentment towards society as a whole. One of the central themes in Rodger's manifesto is his frustration with women. He repeatedly expresses anger over what he perceives as deliberate rejection by women, particularly attractive women, whom he believes should have been interested in him. Rodger viewed the attention and affection of women as something he deserved by virtue of his upbringing and appearance. However, his inability to form relationships, coupled with his struggles with social interaction, led him to the belief that women were intentionally excluding him from a life of happiness. This resentment toward women became a core element of his manifesto, driving much of the violent rhetoric he used in justifying his planned attack. Rodger's writings frequently mention his envy of men who were successful with women, especially those he described as alpha males, individuals who, in his eyes, embodied the social and sexual success he craved. He fixated on the idea that he was being unfairly marginalized and that others, particularly men who were less deserving than him, were reaping the benefits of romantic relationships that he felt entitled to. This belief manifested in a profound sense of societal anger. Rodger blamed both men and women for his perceived failures in life, viewing men as competition and women as the gatekeepers who denied him happiness. Rodger's manifesto also touches on his relationship with his family, though these discussions are largely overshadowed by his broader grievances. He speaks of his father's remarriage, expressing bitterness over the attention his father gave to his new wife and step-sibling. However, his frustrations with his family are secondary to his all-consuming focus on the perceived injustices inflicted upon him by society, particularly women and the men who succeeded in attracting them. The influence of the Incel ideology is evident throughout My Twisted World. The term Incel stands for involuntary celibate, a label adopted by individuals, often men, who feel frustrated by their inability to form romantic or sexual relationships despite wanting them. This online subculture often harbors deeply misogynistic views, blaming women for their frustrations and, in some cases, advocating violence against them. Rodger did not explicitly identify himself as an incel, but his writings reflect many of the key tenets of this ideology. His deep-seated resentment of women, his belief that he was entitled to their attention, and his anger toward men who were successful in relationships all align with the beliefs commonly expressed within incel communities. In addition to his manifesto, Rodger also posted a series of videos on YouTube leading up to the attack, further elaborating on his thoughts and plans. In these videos, he directly addressed his frustrations and outlined his plan to exact revenge on the world for the perceived slights he had endured. In one particularly disturbing video titled Elliot Rodger's Retribution, he calmly discussed his intention to punish women for rejecting him and men for living the life he believed he deserved. These videos, like his manifesto, provide a chilling window into his disturbed psyche and the way his personal grievances had metastasized into a desire for violent revenge. In the months leading up to the attack, Elliot Rodger's behavior became increasingly erratic and isolated. He was already struggling with deep feelings of rejection and social isolation, but during this period his thoughts began to take a darker, more violent turn. He meticulously planned what he called his day of retribution, a day in which he intended to punish those he believed were responsible for his suffering, especially women and the men they chose over him. One key element of his plan was the acquisition of firearms. Between 2012 and 2014, Rodger legally purchased 3 semi-automatic handguns from licensed dealers in California. He bought a Glock 34, a Sig Sauer P226, and a second Glock 34. All 3 guns were purchased legally, despite his known struggles with mental health issues. Rodger passed all required background checks as he had no criminal record and had never been involuntarily committed to a mental health facility, which would have flagged him as ineligible to purchase firearms. Rodger also purchased ammunition in preparation for his attack. The acquisition of these weapons, particularly the guns, was a significant escalation in his preparations. During this period, Rodger's isolation grew even more pronounced. Despite attempts by his family to reach out and help him, he withdrew further into himself. He dropped out of college and spent most of his time alone, either in his apartment or driving around Isla Vista, where he watched the lives of the students with envy and resentment. His social life was nearly non-existent, and his few attempts to interact with others often ended in frustration or rejection, which only fueled his feelings of anger and hopelessness. Rodger's isolation was not just physical but also emotional, as he fixated on his perceived grievances and withdrew from meaningful connections with family, friends, or mental health professionals. There were, however, notable warning signs in the months before the attack. In April 2014, just a month before the murders, Rodger's family became increasingly concerned about his behavior and contacted law enforcement. His mother had seen some of the disturbing videos he had posted online, where he ranted about his loneliness and frustrations, and she feared that he might pose a danger to himself or others. As a result, Santa Barbara County Sheriff's deputies were dispatched to Rodger's apartment for a welfare check. When the officers arrived, they found Rodger to be calm and polite. He reassured them that he was simply going through a rough time and that everything was fine. Rodger later wrote in his manifesto that he had been terrified during this encounter, fearing that the deputies might discover the guns and ammunition he had stored in his room or the detailed plans for his attack. He knew that if they had searched his apartment, his plan would have been foiled. However, the officers had no legal reason to conduct a search, as Rodger did not meet the criteria for involuntary commitment, and they left without taking further action. This welfare check, though well-intentioned, has since been scrutinized, as it was a missed opportunity to prevent the tragedy that would soon unfold. In the weeks following the welfare check, Rodger's behavior became even more disturbing. He continued to post videos on YouTube, many of which contained explicit references to his hatred for women and his growing desire for revenge. In these videos, he ranted about how women rejected him, how he was a victim of an unjust society, and how he planned to exact his revenge on those who had wronged him. One of his final videos, titled Elliot Rodger's Retribution, was posted just hours before the attack. In this video, Rodger laid out his grievances in chilling detail, calmly explaining that he intended to punish the world for what he saw as his years of suffering and exclusion. He spoke with cold determination about his plan to kill as many people as possible, particularly women whom he blamed for his loneliness and frustration. In addition to his videos, Rodger had been active in several online forums where he expressed his frustration and anger. These posts often reflected the same themes as his manifesto and videos: his bitterness toward women, his envy of men who were successful in relationships, and his belief that the world was deeply unfair to him. He found some validation in these online communities, particularly those associated with the Incel, involuntary celibate subculture, where others shared similar frustrations about their inability to form romantic or sexual relationships. On May 23, 2014, Elliot Rodger carried out a carefully planned and devastating attack in Isla Vista, California, a community adjacent to the University of California, Santa Barbara. The events of that day unfolded over a period of approximately 10 minutes, beginning with the brutal murders of his roommates and ending in a deadly rampage across Isla Vista that left 6 people dead and 14 others injured. The day began like any other for most residents of Isla Vista, but for Rodger, it marked the culmination of years of planning and resentment. His first act of violence occurred in his own apartment, where he fatally stabbed his roommates. At around 9:27 p.m., Rodger ambushed and killed Chung-Yuan Hong, George Chen, and Wei-Han Wang, all of whom shared the apartment with him. According to investigators, the attacks were premeditated, as Rodger had been planning to eliminate his roommates to ensure they wouldn't interfere with his larger plan. He used a knife to carry out these murders, and all 3 men suffered multiple stab wounds. The attack on his roommates was brutal and personal, demonstrating the extent of Rodger's escalating rage. After killing his roommates, Rodger left the apartment and began his planned attack on the wider community. At approximately 9:30 p.m., he uploaded his final video, Elliot Rodger's Retribution, to YouTube. In the video, he calmly explained his intentions to punish society, particularly women, for rejecting him. Minutes after uploading the video, he sent his manifesto titled My Twisted World via email to a number of people, including his parents and therapist. Shortly after these digital actions, Rodger drove to the Alpha Phi sorority house located on the University of California, Santa Barbara campus. His manifesto had singled out the sorority as a symbol of the type of women he despised, those he believed had spurned him throughout his life. At approximately 9:33 p.m., Rodger arrived at the house, armed with 2 semi-automatic handguns. He knocked on the door but received no response. When no one opened the door, Rodger quickly grew frustrated and began shooting at 3 women standing nearby. He fatally shot 2 of them, Catherine Cooper and Veronica Weiss, and seriously wounded the 3rd. The attack on these women marked the start of Rodger's rampage through Isla Vista. After leaving the sorority house, Rodger continued driving through the streets of Isla Vista, indiscriminately targeting pedestrians, cyclists, and others who crossed his path. At 9:35 p.m., he fired multiple rounds into the IV Deli Mart, a local convenience store. Inside, 20-year-old Christopher Michaels Martinez, a UCSB student, was struck and killed by the gunfire. Rodger's actions in the Deli Mart were brief, lasting just moments, but they left yet another victim in his wake. From there, Rodger continued his violent spree, driving through the streets and firing out of the window of his black BMW. He shot at pedestrians and cyclists, hitting several people. At one point, he fired at a woman who was walking on the sidewalk, striking her in the hip. Another cyclist was struck by gunfire, while several others were hit by Rodger's car as he swerved through the streets using his vehicle as a weapon. His chaotic path of destruction left a trail of injured victims, some of whom were hit by gunfire, others who were struck by his car. As law enforcement responded to reports of gunfire, Rodger found himself being pursued by sheriff's deputies. At approximately 9:38 p.m., a gunfight ensued between Rodger and the deputies near the intersection of Sabato Tard and Camino del Sur. Rodger was able to evade the deputies and continued his rampage, but the gunfire had damaged his car's windshield and injured him. This encounter with law enforcement signaled the beginning of the end of his attack. Rodger continued driving, but his ability to carry out further violence was hampered by his injuries and the damage to his car. Despite this, he managed to strike another cyclist with his vehicle, sending the man flying onto the hood of the BMW before falling to the pavement. Shortly after, Rodger collided with several parked cars, bringing his rampage to a sudden halt. At approximately 9:40 p.m., deputies approached the wrecked BMW and discovered Rodger inside, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. His violent spree had come to an end. Inside the car, investigators found 3 semi-automatic handguns along with over 400 rounds of unused ammunition, indicating that Rodger had intended to inflict even more harm than he ultimately did. The crime scene spanned multiple blocks, and it took law enforcement some time to assess the full extent of the damage. In addition to the 6 people killed, 14 others were injured in the rampage. These injuries were caused by both gunfire and Rodger's reckless driving as he swerved through the streets of Isla Vista, intentionally targeting pedestrians and cyclists. Some of the victims were struck by bullets as Rodger fired indiscriminately from his car. For example, a woman walking along the sidewalk was shot in the hip, while a man riding his bike was shot in the leg. Others were injured when Rodger used his car as a weapon. One cyclist was struck so violently by Rodger's vehicle that he was launched onto the hood of the BMW before falling to the ground. These injuries ranged from relatively minor to severe, with several individuals requiring emergency medical treatment. The role of law enforcement in this tragic event has been the subject of much debate and reflection. While deputies responded quickly to the active shooting, there remains lingering controversy over the welfare check conducted a month earlier. The decision not to search Rodger's apartment, despite his family's concerns, has raised questions about the effectiveness of law enforcement interventions in situations where individuals may be showing signs of potential violence, but not yet posing an immediate legal threat. This case highlighted the challenges law enforcement faces when balancing civil liberties with the need to protect the public from individuals who may be in a state of crisis or harbor violent intentions. In the aftermath of the attack, law enforcement agencies conducted a thorough review of their response, looking for areas of improvement in handling situations like Rodger's. The incident emphasized the importance of mental health assessments and the need for improved communication between law enforcement, mental health professionals, and families in crisis situations. If you found this video informative and want to see more deep dives into true crime cases, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We post new content regularly, so make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.